Welcome to the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast for club owners, operators, and fitness professionals. Each week, host Bryan O'Rourke brings you an expert interview with a global influencer at the crossroads of fitness and technology. You gain the insights, tools, and inspiration you need to stay connected to the pulse for what matters most for your business in the age of exponential technologies.
Welcome, listeners, to pod number 151. And today we have a futurist, a keynote, really interesting guy, John Sanei, who you got to check him out. In the show notes, we'll have TikTok, Instagram, and LinkedIn. A great speaker and really a phenomenal person to talk to and ask the question, how do we prepare for the future? I really enjoyed this conversation, and I strongly encourage you to check him out after you listen to the podcast. And so, without further ado, let's have John on the show. Well, listeners, as I said in the introduction, we have a real pleasure of having John Sanei on the podcast today. John, it's great to see you, my friend.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to see you again, and great to be here with you today. Looking forward to today's conversation.
You know, I really have enjoyed following your content. We'll, of course, have links in the show notes so that you can follow John on TikTok, Instagram, all the different platforms. He does a great job with his content. I really recommend you checking it out. So look in the show notes, everyone. John, you know, as a futurist, as a very well followed and loved futurist, I would say, as a thought leader, as a writer of books, with everything you do, one of your themes, of course, is helping people prepare for the future. John, for our listeners, can you synthesize how should we be preparing for the future, John?
Well, look, it's the $1 million question, right? Or should I say $1 trillion question? Million's like almost nothing these days, right? $1 trillion question. Preparation for the future is such a vast topic.
Yes.
And at the heart of all the topics that we'll talk about sits the human being. So when we talk about preparation for the future, I like to focus in on the human operating system that is being prepared for the future and allowing that operating system to figure out what the future looks like for them. Now, let me explain what that means. Einstein has a great quote. He says, you cannot solve a problem from the same awareness that created it. And so where we are right now as a human population is a population that's being programmed, educated, and really being ushered into thinking about the way we add value in a process of analytical, logical, and an addiction to certainty in a process that represents those sort of skill sets. The more knowledgeable you had, the more IQ you had, the more analytical you were in your discussion or way of thinking, the more successful you'd become. The second thing that we were also sort of being programmed into is the better you followed the system, the more successful you'd become. So when you went to school, to university, into organizations, that's really what counted. But the problem is that the future is not based on the economies of scale. It's not based on efficiencies. It's not based on the 10,000-hour rule. It's not based on a linear profession that we've been taught for the last 200 years. But the problem is that people are trying to figure out the future from the current level of awareness. So you got to ask yourself, how do I change awareness so I can start to see solutions that I otherwise could not have seen? And so you got to break down awareness into what is awareness? And awareness is really your personality in many ways. It's the way you've been formed. And if we break it down further, is what's your personality made of? And your personality is made up of how you think, how you act, and how you feel. Now, the problem is that science is proving to us that by the time we're 35 years old, we have between 60 and 70,000 thoughts a day, of which 90% are the same thoughts as yesterday. Which means that our awareness is not changing because our brains don't want to change. So what we have to start to think about is, can we think more about how we think? And can we break down what our personalities are made of so we can start to think in new ways, so we can start to see solutions in new ways? Now, a second layer to this is that not only are our brains stuck in thinking what we used to think about yesterday, which means our preparation for the future is futile because the future is not like our past. The second thing we also have to think about is not only are our brains stuck, we are in survival mode, which means that our brains have been programmed not only to think the same thoughts, but in a high beta brainwave, putting us into survival and fueling us with adrenaline. This is the least helpful brainwave for being lateral in your thinking, for being collaborative in your actions, and to be disruptive in the way you think about the future. So not only are we programmed into high beta, we've been educated into analytical and logic. And so at the heart of all businesses lies a CEO and a board of execs that are trying to figure out the future from a level of awareness that's not relevant anymore. And so the second quote and the last piece on this is Alvin Toffler in the 1950s said something very, very profound. He said, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be the ones who cannot read and write, but the ones who cannot unlearn to relearn. So you got to ask yourself a question. In order for me to change my awareness, to bring about new solutions for the future, I need to learn how to unlearn to relearn. And so then you got to ask yourself, how do I unlearn? What does that even mean? And it means that you need to make your brain malleable, adaptable, flexible, and have this almost flexibility like your body would have if you did yoga and trained for your whole life. Your brain is a muscle in very similar ways that if you don't train it, it becomes stiff like your body, right? Now, what makes your brain malleable? There's a couple things. One, trauma healing. Because when you heal your trauma, your brain starts to reform and recreate and change the memories you had about that trauma. That's how you heal trauma, is you change your memories about what happened. The second thing is meditation, because meditation gives you this opportunity to go into a state of stillness, stop being you who's created all your problems, and create a malleable state in that. And the third is psychedelic psilocybin, which does exactly the same thing as meditation. It creates a malleability in your brain. So to come future, stop organizational structures, stop worrying about organizational strategies, start worrying about taking yourself and your leadership team around you to change your awareness, and then allow that new awareness to figure out what the future could look like for you.
Brilliant, brilliant answer. And so many, to your point earlier, it's such a broad subject. But yeah. I do agree with you. I really like Rita McGrath and her stuff on strategy, because you can't plan to be right.
Yeah.
The whole way, you can't plan to be right. You have to change the way your mind works to actually benefit from what's happening. And if you don't do that, you're really going to be in a lot of trouble. Thank you for that answer, John. It was very, very well answered. Very, very well. Such a broad subject. John, on one of your posts I saw recently, you were mentioning that you were going to work on another book, but you sided against it. And you talked about commoditization. And, in the fitness space, there's just a ton of, for example, workouts you can get for free and other information. And this is impacting a lot of businesses and things like with your commentary on books. Can you talk about commoditization and the implications of that, please?
Absolutely. Let's remember that we live in a very commoditized world. And let's think about what's already been commoditized. Is our physicality has already been commoditized. So back in the agricultural era, 99% of the human population were farming. Today, 1.3% of the human population farms. Why? Because farming has become commoditized. You don't wake up wanting to go work in the fields. You have got different ways to express yourself now. Your creativity is different. Your brain's different. All those things have become different. But the thing with technology and the thing with human beings is we're constantly looking for bringing about more efficiencies and better ways and easier ways of doing things. And so what's happened over the last 200 years, we've been so addicted to efficiencies and outcomes that we've created tools like technology that are creating something called a zero marginal cost society. In other words, everything that's digitized is replicated for zero. And anytime anything that's replicated for zero, it loses its value because you have a surplus of it. Now, when we initially started thinking about technology, we thought that the rudimentary jobs like the checkout teller and The simple jobs would be taken over. But by the most incredible surprise, what has started to happen is that our creativity is being challenged even earlier than the till person at the checkout being disrupted. And all of a sudden now what we have is things that were highly regarded as human skills and human value is becoming irrelevant. So the likes of ChatGPT, the likes of Midjourney, they have not only taken away logical ways of thinking about things, they're taking away creativity away from us. Now, let's bank that and let's go to and understand how technology creates this free for all access and how it's already done this to photos, to information, to entertainment, to education, to communication. What's next? Transportation, power generation. And here's the big one that we all need to take into account, is that it's about to commoditize, and has already began, our creativity and our services. And what does this mean? Is that most of the human population are in the services game. Accountants, lawyers, nutritionists, thought leaders, authors. These people are admin people. These are all services. And then we have the creatives, the musicians, the artists, all of these are up for question all of a sudden. And if we look at the trajectory of what's coming, Yuval Harari calls this the emergence of the useless class. And what this means is that over the next 5 years, we'll start to see 2 to 3 billion people that were highly regarded, highly paid, and highly respected become useless. And I'm putting myself into this category because as a thought leader, what is the best way for you to get a strategy for your business? Ask ChatGPT 4, not me. ChatGPT 4 will give you broader, more distinct, forever answering better and better questions. And that's ChatGPT 4. We got ChatGPT 5 coming, and then I don't even know where it's going, right? So we have to realize that commoditization of the human skill set in its current format is here and is accelerating. And this gives us even more impetus to change how we think about what value we add, how we add value. Now, just on a sort of a caveat on this is we have prized ourselves over the last 10,000 years, initially for our physicality, and for 10,000 years was for physicality. For the last 200 years, we've prized ourselves on intelligence, which is very different to physicality. And when we're in physicality terms, when you were telling somebody that your ability to work a field will be irrelevant soon, people would go, well, how would I add value if I can't work the fields? Nobody knew about accounting or law, or nothing was irrelevant. We didn't know. These evolved and bubbled. But as human beings, we suffer from the Goldilocks challenge, which means every porridge is either too cold or too soft or too hard. The only right porridge is what we're experiencing right now. And so when I tell you that the intelligence currency will become irrelevant over the next 5 to 10 years, people panic because they're like, what do you mean? What about critical thinking? What about all the education I've had? What about all the university? Impossible, John, impossible. That's not going to happen. And what I keep saying to them is the currency of the future will be an emotional currency. It will be a heart-led currency. It will be a different currency to the one we understand now. But the quickest thing you can do is unlearn how you think you should be bringing value to the world and start to become curious how you should be bringing value to the world, which nobody really knows, but it's through a process of more wisdom and less smartness. Yes. More emotional intelligence and less MBAs. And so it's that world that's slowly fading into the background, and a new world that's scaring most people. Why? Because we've been baked into a high beta brainwave, addicted to certainties and efficiencies over everything else. Our brains don't want to change. And so what do? We panic. Rather than helping us change our own awareness, look for new ways to add value, and get away from the commoditization machine and realize the trajectory of commoditization will affect almost every single industry in the biggest of ways, except one: human experiences. At this stage, I still can't see human experiences being challenged, not at this stage. I might be wrong in 6 months or a year. You never know what's coming. But for the moment, I don't think holidays are going anywhere. I don't think human masseuses are going anywhere. I don't think that human connection is going anywhere. In fact, I think that human connection will become even more expensive in many ways.
Yes, that makes complete sense. That's another great answer, John. Thank you so much. So in light of
My
this,
pleasure.
that kind of segues into the thing we were talking about before we got started this, which is how do you lead as a leader, and how are businesses going to reform themselves in the midst of all this change? I know you're going to work on the how you think. I mean, what do leaders need to be doing?
Great question again. And I think, again, very broad, because you have a leader who's the chairman and CEO of a 60,000 strong organization, and you have a leader that owns a restaurant and has 60 staff members, right? So leadership in its own form is very, very broad. My focus comes in at corporate C-suite decision makers. So I work with executive teams of 10 or 12 people, and then maybe their top 50 people in the organization. And that's kind of where I stop. And so that's my speciality and expertise. So I can only really answer it on that level. I do have answers for other types of leaders, but for those specific leaders, there's three things that need to be done. The first thing that needs to be done is the top 10 people in every organization need to come in and understand that the future might be a skill set that they might not possess to prepare for. This is really important, because if we think about the constant organizational stories that we laugh at, like Blockbuster, like Kodak, we laugh at them, but then we sit inside those boardrooms with exactly the same problems. And I keep telling my clients, why didn't Mercedes-Benz come up with Tesla? And why didn't NASA come up with SpaceX? And why didn't Google come up with OpenAI? And none of them are stupid. None of them don't have McKinsey's helping them and Accenture helping them. You've got the smarts of the smarts helping them, but they couldn't see those new solutions. And so the first thing you have to do is build that level of releasing of some power in the top echelons of leadership. That's the first thing. It's actually a very emotionally intelligent way of saying, I don't know. That's the first thing. The second thing is that this message must be brought into an organization through what I think is a process of internal media. What I mean by this is that we have always thought of education as going to a workshop, sitting in a conference, and then leaving. But actually, you and I, Bryan, are educated more through TikTok, through podcasts, and through newsletters than any conference that we ever go to. Why? Because those are daily iterations of our brain patterning and our brain waves. And so if we're not on a daily basis, if not 2 or 3 times a day, being engaging with new information inside an organization, your brain is slowly but surely staying exactly where it was rather than it needs to go. So through a process of newsletters, podcasts, short form videos, how are you bringing that type of thinking, deepening it into the organization? The third thing we should be doing is alleviating schizophrenia from our existing leadership group. And what I mean by this is that we often ask the same people that were hired to bring stability and efficiency to the organization to bring about disruptive thinking of creating a brand new business model that makes your current business model obsolete. So I break this down into today, tomorrow, and day after teams. And so you actually need to start setting up new capabilities to think about 2 to 3 years' time, while you take your current team and you drip feed them new information to help them rewire, refire, unlearn, and recalibrate. But you don't have the time to let them get ready for what's coming day after tomorrow. So you need a 3-pronged approach. It's the top leaders, the just below them leaders, and a tomorrow team. And in that process, what you start to do is you get people to be super focused on either keeping the lights on or planting seeds for tomorrow. And stop kidding yourself thinking that the same person can do both. Impossible. That's why Google didn't come up with OpenAI. It's quite simple.
The innovator's dilemma, huh? The innovator's dilemma. Yes.
Exactly. And so what we think about is leadership in smaller businesses is I always suggest 2 things. 1, get a reverse mentor. Mm-hmm. Get a 20-year-old kid to tell you what's going on in the world. And 2, make sure that you're spending at least 20 minutes a day in the future. Yep. At least. Stop listening to the radio, stop watching TV, listen to a podcast, let's watch a YouTube. Just think about stuff in the future as often as possible. Now, the most important thing for all the leaders, in fact, for every human being, is the skill set of the future is a emotional process, not an intelligence process. And what I mean by this is, in order for you to engage with a strange world, with a world that is not familiar to any of us, you need a calm heart and a clear head. And if you're arriving panicked or anxious or frustrated at a strange world, not only do you not engage with it, you're angry with it. And so realize that the flex of the future is a calm nervous system. Because at a calm nervous system, you have the energy to engage with new information. You've got an ability to be adaptable. And thirdly, and most importantly, you cherish change. If you don't have a calm nervous system, you avoid change, and that's your peril. That's your demise. And so when we think about change management, or when you think about adaptability and you think about agility, and all these organizations say all these things, but their organizations' people are highly stressed, highly anxious, because they're under huge pressure to perform for today and for tomorrow, but you're asking them to be adaptable. It's almost, not almost, it is a real life impossibility for your brain both to be addicted to certainty and to be adaptable. Yep. It just doesn't work.
Yep.
And so my practice is a twice-a-day meditation, cold water immersions, trauma healing. And the only reason I do this is so that I can engage with the future in optimistic ways and celebrate uncertainty rather than run away from it.
Brilliant, brilliant, John. And again, I'd recommend all the listeners to please check out his content. If you like what you're seeing and hearing, there is a plethora of it on the various platforms, TikTok, Instagram, etc. I think it's fantastic. John,
Thank you, Bryan.
a few last questions for you. Number one, what book or books outside of your own, which are great, what book or books would you suggest listeners read or catch up on, or even a podcast if you prefer that, because I do all of them, but go ahead. What are you thinking about?
I'm going to give you one book, one podcast. The book would be from Dr. Joe Dispenza, and it's called Becoming Supernatural. And the reason I recommend this is I think that Dr. Joe Dispenza has figured out how to upgrade our hardware, not even our software. He's given us an opportunity to engage with latent information that's been sitting inside our heads for eons of time. And he's brought science to it. He's not a man of faith. He's not a sandal wearing, lentil eating guy with a Jesus hair bun. He's not like, he's a 60-year-old Italian man. He's very serious about what he does. He's a scientist. But what's happened is through his research and writing of his books, he's figured out this latent potential of human beings. And when I was at his last retreat, he had a scientist up there and he did a presentation. The presentation was called The Evolution of the Species. Yep. And he's brought about a new way for us to engage with creativity, our brains, our consciousness, and a whole bunch of things. So becoming supernatural gives us opportunity to evolve and elevate ourselves as human beings so that we're not fearful of a ubiquitous world of AI. That's really important because we can get away from the fear of that, right? The second book, the podcast I would recommend is Scott Galloway, Prof. G.
Love it.
And love it. He's great. He's on it. He's honest. He's self-deprecating. He's all about empowering masculinity, making more money, creating wealth. I just think he's an all-round good guy. I think he's an all-round honest man, and he's very, very smart at what he does around the markets. And I've really started to enjoy him more and more over the time. He's got a very dry and dirty sense of humor. But again, that's really part of being podcasters, right? So you want to be as honest as possible. So one, how do you improve yourself as a human being? And two, how do you have fun with making better decisions based on real market input? And when you have those two, you have a calm nervous system and you have somebody guiding you make better decisions, you really are on a pound seat and you can't, go wrong if you've got those two sort of boxes ticked.
It's so ironic that you would bring up Scott because I was featuring him on my talks starting probably 6 or 7 years ago, before he was as popular as he is now.
Yeah.
And, he's really come a long way, and he has some more stuff coming out, I know. So that's a good, I agree with you. I follow his pods as well.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's
funny.
Fun.
You know,
Yes.
you're funny. You're laughing and learning all the time, which I think is really key. You know, it's a fun part.
Yeah, it is. You're right. Your description of it is spot on. So I always ask this of our guests because I think you probably have already hit on a few of them, but I always ask for some pearls of wisdom for our listeners. So given these dynamics that you've mentioned, given the future and people trying to figure out how to embrace it, what are some pearls of wisdom, if you haven't already shared enough? What are those pearls that you, if you would not mind?
I think that what most people are doing around the world are panicking about the change. And the biggest thing I can leave you with is that if you take all that energy of panic and redirect it to ask yourself one question: who am I becoming through this change to add value in new ways? And if you keep coming back to that question, your focus and energy starts to go to seriously think about elevating your awareness, elevating your consciousness, healing your past, so that your ability to make better decisions with a calmer heart and a clearer mind start to put you in a much better position to be optimistic, creative, collaborative, and add value in brand new ways, and in turn make money. So what has happened is that because we've been taught to follow one track, and that track would always allow us to make money, follow the system better and make more money, chase yourself and make more money, kill yourself to make more money. Now, all of a sudden, that's like become null and void because it's become commoditized. And now we got to swing to a new way of making money. But before people even jump, they're panicking. And so my request and my urge is, don't panic. Do the work to evolve yourself, and the panic will go. And the best way to do this that I found is microdosing and meditation, because these are the two things that help you rewire your brain as quickly as possible. And if you just focus on that, everything else will look after itself. When you're coming at the world with a state of anxiousness, everything is a problem. When you're coming at the world with a calm heart and a clear mind, with a malleable approach, nothing's a problem.
Yes.
Everything's exciting. There's only opportunities.
Yes.
So that would be my one suggestion.
John, what a great conversation. I, again, will tell the listeners, check out the show notes, connect with John. He has great content out there, fantastic stuff. I love the way you process the world and your thoughts.
Thank you.
I got to tell you, it's fantastic. A great sound advice. And it was a real privilege to have you on the show today. Thank you so much, John.
My absolute pleasure, Bryan. I look forward to seeing you real soon.
Hello, listeners. This is Bryan O'Rourke, and thanks so much for listening to the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast. The podcast is made possible by the Fitness Industry Technology Council, a consortium of global brands working together to enhance the adoption of technologies in the fitness space. Our company, Videri Ventures, which is invested in Vertimax, Montezuma, Gold's Gym, Houston, Texas, and Fitness 24/7 Thailand, also underwrites the podcast, along with our service companies, Integris Advisors, Moon Mission Media, and others. Please feel free to share this podcast with your colleagues. And if I can be of any assistance to you, don't hesitate to reach out, bryanko'rourke@gmail.com, or find me on any of the major social networks. Have a great day, and thanks for listening.